Have you ever found yourself wondering, what truly separates a reliable insight from just, well, an opinion?
Hmm.
Or how some of the most impactful decisions, maybe in history or even just in your own daily life, how are they actually made?
It's a really fundamental question, isn't it?
Hmm.
Especially now. We're just swimming in information.
Totally. Trying to figure out what's solid and what's, just noise.
Exactly. It can feel like navigating through thick fog sometimes. But there's this powerful kind of underlying framework that guides us, a systematic way of thinking.
And that's what we're diving into today.
Precisely. We're
Yeah.
talking about evidence-based thinking.
Okay. So we're going to unpack how scientific principles, maybe from abstract philosophy right down to practical methods used in labs and businesses, how they don't just shape research.
Right. It's way beyond just the lab coat stuff. These ideas have fundamentally revolutionized entire industries. They've improved public health dramatically, driven huge social change.
And maybe surprisingly, they can actually enhance how effective you are just day to day.
That's the really interesting part, I think, how it connects back to us. And for this deep dive, we've pulled together quite a stack of sources.
Okay, what have we got?
We'll be getting into the philosophical foundations of science, where these ideas even come from. We'll trace how management theories evolved, transforming work.
Like Taylor and scientific management.
Exactly. And then bring it forward to modern business strategy. Look at the complexities of public health programs, the power of actually measuring social impact.
So proving you're making a difference.
Yes. And even touch on how philosophy itself isn't just academic, it's relevant every day.
Okay. So our mission here is pretty clear then. We want to pull out the key insights from all this.
Help you understand how embracing this evidence-based mindset, prioritizing facts and rigorous thinking, can open up new possibilities.
And help you make better, more informed decisions in what feels like an increasingly complicated world.
Couldn't have said it better. So let's get into it.
All right. To really get a handle on evidence-based thinking, we kind of have to start at the philosophical beginning, right? With this idea of positivism.
Yes, positivism is really the bedrock for a lot of scientific thought, especially traditionally.
So what is it exactly? What's the core idea?
At its heart, positivism is this philosophical stance that says true, verifiable knowledge. It can only come from stuff we can observe and directly experience.
Okay, so seeing is believing, basically, or measuring is believing.
Pretty much. It really emphasizes using scientific methods, the kind you'd associate with physics or chemistry, to study any phenomenon, whether it's, a chemical reaction or how people interact in a group.
So it's about building knowledge based on what we can, see, hear, touch, measure, test.
Exactly. If you can't verify it empirically, through your senses or precise instruments, a strict positivist would say it's not really reliable knowledge, it's speculation, or maybe metaphysics, but not science.
That sounds so logical to us now. But back then, that must have been a really radical shift. I mean, for centuries, understanding was tied up with religion or superstition or just abstract ideas you couldn't prove.
Oh, absolutely. You hit on a key point. For so long, you just accepted what authorities told you or what had always been believed. This shift is really rooted in the 19th century, and a lot of it traces back to Auguste Comte.
Ah, Comte, the father of scientific management, or maybe sociology.
Well, he's definitely seen as a foundational figure in sociology, and he coined the term positivism. He had this fascinating idea about how human thought itself evolves.
It's the 3 stages, right.
Exactly. First, Comte said we were in the theological stage. Everything was explained by God, spirits, supernatural forces, lightning, God's anger.
Makes sense for ancient times.
Then we moved into the metaphysical stage. People started thinking more abstractly, explaining things through hidden forces or principles like nature or reason, a step towards rationality, but still not grounded in hard evidence. And finally, Comte believed humanity was entering the pinnacle, the positive stage. Here, knowledge is based purely on empirical evidence, systematic observation, and scientific reasoning. No more gods, no more vague forces, just what we can actually demonstrate.
And he didn't just want this for science labs, did he? He had bigger plans.
Precisely. Comte was fundamentally a sociologist. He passionately believed that these same rigorous scientific methods, observation, experimentation where possible, logical analysis, should be applied to study society itself.
So like a science of society.
Exactly. His goal was to uncover the underlying laws governing human behavior and social structures, just like Newton found the laws of motion. He thought if we understood these social laws, we could engineer a better, more rational, more orderly society. Positivism wasn't just about knowing. It was about improving.
That's a really ambitious vision. So if you're a researcher working within this positivist framework, what does your research actually look like? What are the defining features?
There are really four key characteristics you'd look for. First, a huge emphasis on objectivity. The researcher tries to be completely neutral, free from personal biases or values. You just report the facts as observed.
Easier said than done, maybe, but that's the goal.
It's definitely the ideal. Second is empiricism. Knowledge must come from data collected through observation or experience. You're out there gathering evidence, not just theorizing.
Okay, so real-world data.
And that data often takes a specific form, which leads to the third point, quantification. Positivist research very often relies on quantitative methods, surveys, experiments, statistical analysis, turning observations into numbers.
Measuring things precisely.
Right, and finally, typically uses deductive reasoning. You start with a theory or a specific hypothesis like X causes Y, and then you collect data to see if the evidence supports or refutes that hypothesis.
Theory first, then test it against reality.
Exactly, that's the classic model.
Okay, that paints a clear picture. Now let's make it concrete. Where do we see positivism really making a difference out there in the world? Can you give us some solid examples?
Oh, definitely. A classic, maybe the ultimate example, is in physics. Think about Sir Isaac Newton's laws of motion.
Falling apples and planets.
Right. These weren't just thoughts he had. They came from intense observation, experimentation, mathematical formulation, and crucially, they've been tested and validated countless times over centuries. They work empirically.
Okay, hard science. Makes sense. What about fields dealing with people?
Well, in psychology, behaviorism is a good example of a positivist approach. Think of Skinner's experiments, focusing only on observable behavior and reinforcement. Or, a more famous, maybe infamous example, the Stanford prison experiment.
Yes, that one. Ethically problematic, but the design.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Setting aside the ethics for a moment, the design was positivist. They created a controlled environment, assigned roles, and observed and measured how people's behavior changed based on the situation, trying to find cause and effect through observation in a controlled setting.
Okay. And in economics.
Economics, particularly the field of econometrics, is steeped in positivism. Economists build complex statistical models using vast amounts of data, GDP, inflation, unemployment rates, you name it.
To predict trends, right?
Yes, to forecast trends, to understand the likely impact of policies like raising interest rates. It's all about using observable data and statistical techniques to make predictions and inform decisions.
These examples really show the power of this approach, especially for prediction and control. But like any framework, it can't be perfect. What are the big strengths and, just as importantly, the limitations of positivism in research?
The strengths are definitely significant, that objectivity we talked about. When done well, it really does reduce personal bias, making findings more trustworthy.
Credibility.
Yes. Then there's reliability. Because it often uses quantitative methods and standardized procedures, results can usually be replicated. Someone else follows your steps, they should get similar results. That builds confidence.
Repeatability is key in science.
And finally, generalizability. If you use large representative samples, positivist research can potentially provide insights that apply to a wider population, not just the specific people you studied.
So you can make broader claims. Those are definite pluses. But what's the downside? Where does this focus on observable, measurable stuff fall short?
The limitations are really important, especially when you're studying complex human beings or societies. A major one is often limited depth.
How so?
By focusing so intensely on what you can measure, positivism can sometimes give you a surface-level understanding. It might tell you what happened or how many people did something, but it often struggles to get at the deeper why, the underlying mechanisms, the motivations, the lived experiences that can get lost.
So you see the symptom, but I maybe miss the cause.
That's a good way to put it. It might not capture the richness of the situation. Another big limitation is dealing with contextual factors.
Meaning?
Life doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Social phenomena especially are embedded in specific historical, cultural, and social contexts. Positivism, aiming for universal laws, can sometimes oversimplify or ignore how crucial these contexts are. What works in one place might not work in another, and positivism might struggle to explain why.
Because it's looking for the general, not the specific nuances.
Exactly. And finally, there's always the issue of measurement error. Even with the best instruments or surveys, the very act of measuring can introduce errors or biases. How you ask a question, who answers it, how data is coded, it all can affect the results. So even the quest for pure objectivity faces practical hurdles.
So, okay, if positivism, especially the statistical kind, can end up giving us these, how did the source put it? Depersonalized, a contextual, ahistorical aggregates of variables.
Right, just numbers connected by stats.
And maybe it's not great at uncovering the real mechanisms, the why behind things. That really begs the question. What if the most important stuff isn't directly observable? What if reality is deeper than just correlations?
And that is precisely the doorway to critical scientific realism, or CSR. It's a really fascinating alternative philosophy of science. CSR says, yes, observing patterns is fine, but it's not the end goal.
It's just the starting point.
Exactly. CSR wants to go beyond those empirical regularities. It aims to discover and investigate the unobservable but real mechanisms that actually generate the phenomena we see.
Unobservable but real.
Okay.
That's a key phrase.
That is. Instead of just saying, hey, X and Y are correlated, CSR asks, okay, but what is the underlying machinery connecting them? What are the hidden causal powers, the generative structures that make this happen?
So it's like wanting to understand the engine inside the car, not just clocking its speed.
Perfect analogy. For critical scientific realist, the real goal of science isn't just describing patterns. It's finding these deep mechanisms. These mechanisms are seen as the essence of the phenomenon, its underlying laws. And without identifying a mechanism, you don't have a real explanation.
That sounds like a direct challenge to pure positivism's focus on only the observable.
It absolutely is. CSR critiques what it sometimes sees as a kind of mindless hunt for statistical correlations, arguing that it often fails to grasp the actual causal powers driving events.
So if these mechanisms are unobservable, how on earth do CSR researchers find them? You can't just put them under a microscope.
Right. And this leads to the idea of deep ontology. Realist researchers believe reality has layers. There's the surface level of observable events, but beneath that is a deeper level of real, unobservable structures and mechanisms.
Okay, reality has depth, but how do you access that depth?
Not just through observation alone, this is crucial. CSR relies heavily on rational reasoning, specifically through processes called abduction and retroduction.
Abduction and retroduction. Sounds like something Sherlock Holmes would do.
It kind of is. Think of it like making an educated leap, an inference to the best explanation. Abduction starts with a puzzle, some surprising data. The researcher then thinks, what underlying mechanism, if it were real, would best explain this surprising data?
Okay, reasoning backwards from the clues.
Exactly. And retroduction is very similar, maybe more focused on thinking back from the observed effects to their likely underlying causes. You hypothesize about the causal mechanisms and generative powers that must have been at work to produce what you observed.
So it's less about running stats programs and more about the researcher's thinking.
That's a key point in CSR. It emphasizes the researcher's creative, insightful mind. It's the human ability to reason, to theorize, to imagine potential explanations based on the evidence that leads to discovering these mechanisms. Those statistics might help describe the surface, but the leap to the underlying mechanism comes from thought.
This must change how you define things, too. Positivism wants clear operational definitions for measurement. What does CSR do with concepts that are inherently unobservable, like motivation or power?
That's another really important distinction. CSR agrees that operational definitions are fine for empirical constructs, things you can directly measure. But it argues that theoretical constructs, especially those representing deep mechanisms or latent forces like Freud's id or sociological ideas like social structure, should not necessarily be forced into narrow operational definitions.
Why not?
Because their value lies in their power for retroductive thinking. They are conceptual tools that help researchers theorize about the components and interactions of the hidden mechanisms, even if you can't stick a number on every part. The idea is that you can still be rigorous and scientific without measuring everything directly. You're investigating real structures, even if they're invisible.
This sounds like it would naturally lead researchers towards studying individual cases really deeply rather than big surveys. Is that right?
Absolutely. A core tenet of CSR, especially in fields like psychology, is that causal mechanisms operate within individuals. They are shaped by personal history, context, the whole system of that person.
So averaging across thousands of people might actually obscure the mechanisms.
CSR proponents would argue exactly that. They often critique the traditional variable-based approach, breaking people down into isolated variables like IQ score or income level and correlating them. They say this destroys the systemic, holistic nature of how things actually work within a person. It reduces a complex reality to statistical abstractions.
So the average doesn't represent any single person's reality.
Right. While stats might show surface patterns, CSR argues they can't really get at the intra-individual mechanisms working at that deeper level.
So if you're not doing large random samples for statistical generalization, how do you choose who or what to study in CSR?
This leads to purposeful sampling. Instead of random selection aiming for statistical representativeness of a population, CSR researchers strategically select specific, information-rich cases.
Like what kind of cases?
Often, they choose extreme cases, or cases that show a lot of variation, or cases that perfectly exemplify a particular context. The goal isn't to generalize findings statistically to everyone, but to choose cases that will maximally illuminate the underlying mechanism.
So you can see the mechanism clearly in action or see how it changes in different situations.
Precisely. It's about describing the invariant aspects, the core parts of the mechanism that seem consistent, and the flexible aspects, how it adapts or looks different depending on the person or context. It's about deepening theoretical understanding, generating rich insights about how things work.
This is fascinating. It's a very different way of thinking about research. Can we walk through a real example? Like, how would a study using CSR actually investigate something like academic motivation?
Okay, yeah, let's look at an empirical study that did exactly this. It used a case-based approach, purposeful sampling, and what they call realist interviewing to explore academic motivation, trying to integrate two big theories, self-determination theory and achievement goal theory.
Okay, so how did they set it up? What was the method?
They started by purposefully selecting 12 successful university students. The selection wasn't random. It was based on survey scores showing a range of motivational profiles, some highly intrinsic, some more driven by external controls to get diversity.
So they picked information-rich cases. Then what?
Then they conducted in-depth interviews using two types of questions. First, construct-focused questions. Things like, in your own words, why do you engage in academic activities? Trying to get the student's own understanding and language around concepts like autonomy or competence.
Okay, getting their perspective on the key ideas.
Then, crucially, they use relation-focused questions like, do you think the goals you set in your courses are related to your motives? If so, how? These were designed to uncover the perceived connections between different motivational factors from the student's viewpoint. Is it causal? Does one influence another?
Trying to map out the system as the student sees it.
Exactly, trying to get at that underlying mechanism through their experience.
So they gather all this rich interview data. How do they analyze it to find these hidden mechanisms? Must be complex.
It's a very rigorous process. First, detailed coding of the transcripts to identify mentions of the constructs and the relationships the students described. Then, they did within-case analysis for each individual student.
Looking at each person separately.
Yes. Examining their unique map of motivations, how things connected for them. They looked for keywords, facilitators, barriers, how strongly they felt each construct. They often created visual, perceived causal maps for each student, showing how they understood the links.
Wow, okay. That's deep individual analysis, but how do you get from 12 individual maps to a general mechanism?
That's the next step. Between case analysis, they systematically compared the findings across all 12 students. They looked for consistencies, which relationships, which pathways kept showing up across different students, even if described slightly differently.
Finding the common patterns in the individual stories.
Exactly. The goal was to identify relationships and mechanisms that were consistently perceived by a majority. This allowed them to build an integrated model, abstracted representation of the invariant aspects, the common core mechanism of academic motivation for these successful students.
So what did they find? What did this integrated causal map reveal about how academic motivation actually works beneath the surface?
Some really fascinating things emerged. They found that autonomy satisfaction, feeling like you're in control of your learning, making your own choices and controlling motivation, feeling pressured or forced, were really fundamental drivers.
So feeling free versus feeling pushed.
Right. And they had opposite effects.
Yeah.
High autonomy satisfaction consistently led to more intrinsic motivation, which then boosted well-being, dedication, and feelings of competence. Feeling controlled, on the other hand, led to poorer well-being and a focus just on performance goals, not real learning.
That makes a lot of intuitive sense. Freedom leads to better outcomes.
It does. But it wasn't just simple cause and effect. They also identified a complex core mechanism involving a cycle, a feedback loop.
Okay, what was looping?
It involved the interplay between two types of goals: mastery goals, wanting to learn and understand, and performance goals, wanting to look smart or avoid looking dumb. along with autonomous motivation and competent satisfaction, feeling capable. These four things were dynamically interconnected.
How so? Give me an example.
Okay, so feeling autonomously motivated made students more likely to set mastery goals. Achieving those learning goals then boosted their sense of competence. Feeling competent, in turn, reinforced their autonomous motivation for future tasks. It was a positive cycle, feeding itself.
Ah, so it's a system, not just a chain reaction. Each part influences the others.
Precisely. A dynamic, interdependent system.
And what were the tangible outcomes? Did this deep mechanism link to things like grades or well-being?
Yes, very clearly.
Yep.
Better academic performance was directly linked to higher competence satisfaction. Feeling capable led to better results. Greater dedication, sticking with studies, wanting to learn more, was directly linked to higher autonomous motivation.
So internal drive leads to persistence.
Mm-hmm. And interestingly, both the types of goals people set and their sense of competence also directly impacted their overall well-being. Feeling good was tied to being interested, performing well, and feeling capable.
So reflecting on this study, what does it tell us about the value of CSR? How does it show a different kind of understanding compared to just correlating survey scores?
Well, this model they developed is presented as a hypothesis about the invariant aspects of the intra-individual mechanism of motivation for these students. Its power comes from being deeply grounded in their lived experiences.
Not just abstract numbers.
Right. It highlights the value of understanding these systemic interdependent relationships within a person, rather than just finding statistical links between isolated variables across a group. The researchers themselves note it's a hypothesis based on self-reports but rigorously analyzed, needing further testing. But they argue this approach gets closer to the real psychological processes, bringing the individual back into focus without sacrificing scientific rigor. It gives a richer, potentially more actionable understanding.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, let's move from the philosophy of science to its really practical application in the world of work and organizations. It seems like these scientific principles fundamentally changed how we manage things. And it often starts with Frederick Winslow Taylor.
Indeed. Taylor, the father of scientific management, he was a real pioneer back in the late 19th, early 20th century. His core belief was that you could apply scientific methods to basically any activity in an organization, even the smallest ones.
To make them more efficient.
Exactly. To eliminate waste, save time and energy, improve productivity. He wanted to replace guesswork as tradition with systematic analysis and optimization. His ideas really did revolutionize industrial work.
So what were his key principles, the core ideas of scientific management?
He laid out 5 main principles. First, and maybe the most fundamental, was science, not the rule of thumb, meaning decisions should be based on scientific study, on cause and effect analysis, not just on intuition, habits, or what worked in the past. He famously did time and motion studies, like analyzing the best way to shovel coal or lift pig iron to find the single best way.
Breaking tasks down scientifically. Okay, what else?
Second was harmony, not discord. Taylor believed that management and workers shouldn't be adversaries, which was common then. They needed a cordial, cooperative relationship, understanding they both needed each other for the organization to succeed.
That sounds almost idealistic for that era of industrial conflict.
It was definitely aspirational, and it required his third principle, a mental revolution.
A revolution in thinking.
Yes, a fundamental shift in attitude from both sides, away from conflict and suspicion towards mutual trust, cooperation, and a shared goal of increasing productivity and prosperity for everyone involved. Full participation was key.
So changing hearts and minds, not just processes.
Which leads to the fourth principle, cooperation, not individualism. This builds on harmony, emphasizing active collaboration. Replace internal competition or people just doing their own thing with a unified collective effort working towards common goals.
Teamwork, essentially, but scientifically managed teamwork.
You could put it that way. And finally, the fifth principle, development of every person to his greatest efficiency. Taylor saw employees as assets to be developed.
Investing in people.
Right. This meant scientific selection, hiring the right person for the right job based on aptitude, and then providing proper training in the scientifically determined best methods to help them become as skilled and efficient as possible.
So these principles, based on observation, analysis, experimentation, what was the actual impact when companies applied them?
The impact was pretty dramatic in many cases. Organizations saw significantly reduced production costs due to less waste and optimized processes. They achieved much increased efficiency, more output for the same input, and things got done faster, leading to less production time per unit. It really paved the way for mass production and modern industrial organization, a huge leap in productivity.
It's amazing how those century-old ideas still echo, but today's business world is so different, global, digital, incredibly fast. How does this scientific thinking apply now? Is it still relevant?
Oh, absolutely essential, maybe even more so. The modern business environment is just relentlessly fast-paced and data-saturated. The need for constant innovation and adaptation is critical. Look at the average lifespan of companies on the S&P 500 index.
It's shrinking dramatically, right?
Massively. From around 61 years back in 1958 to less than 18 years today. That tells you companies have to adapt and innovate constantly or they just disappear.
That's a pretty brutal reality, and yet it sounds like many companies aren't really equipped for it. They aren't using data effectively.
It's quite shocking, actually. A PwC survey from 2019 found only 35% of executives felt their companies were highly data-driven.
Only 35%, so the other 65%.
Are essentially flying blind, as the source puts it, making major decisions based on gut feel, tradition, maybe incomplete information. In an era where AI and machine learning are reshaping everything, that's incredibly risky. Relying on evidence isn't just nice to have, it's becoming table stakes for survival.
So if flying blind is a recipe for disaster, what does applying a scientific approach look like in a modern business context? How do companies actually do it?
It means consciously embedding the scientific method into how the business operates. It's a cycle. First, you form clear, testable hypotheses, not just vague ideas, but specific predictions about what might work: a new product feature, a marketing message, a change to the sales process.
Okay, make a specific guess.
Then you design experiments to test those hypotheses. Think about companies like Google or Amazon, famous for running thousands of A/B tests constantly, testing different website layouts, different recommendation algorithms. They don't guess, they test rigorously.
Let the data decide.
Exactly. Which is the third step. Objectively analyze the results. Look at the data honestly, even if it tells you your brilliant idea didn't actually work.
Ouch. Need to check your ego at the door.
Definitely. And finally, use those insights to inform future decisions. Learn from the experiment. Iterate, refine your approach based on the evidence. It's a continuous loop of hypothesizing, testing, learning, adapting.
That sounds powerful. What are the payoffs for companies that really embrace this?
The benefits are huge. You tend to get more innovative products because you're learning faster what customers actually want and need. You develop more effective marketing because you know what messages and channels actually drive results. And you achieve more efficient operations because you're constantly finding ways to optimize processes based on data. Cutting waste. It fuels growth and resilience.
It sounds great in theory, especially for big companies with lots of resources like Google. But what about startups or smaller businesses? Implementing this kind of rigor must be tough with limited time and money.
You're absolutely right. There are significant hurdles. First, limited resources. Startups especially are often strapped for cash and people. Running experiments takes time and sometimes money they just don't have. A huge percentage of startups fail simply because they run out of money.
So testing feels like a luxury they can't afford?
Often, yes. Then there's intense time pressure. The market moves fast. There's pressure to launch, to scale quickly. Sometimes this leads to premature scaling growing before you've really validated your product or market fit through testing. That's a major cause of failure, too.
Rushing ahead without the evidence.
Another challenge is lack of scientific expertise. Many entrepreneurs don't have a background in statistics or experimental design. So knowing how to run a good experiment or interpret the results can be daunting.
It's a different skill set.
It is. And then there's the human element. Emotional bias. Entrepreneurs are passionate. They believe in their ideas. This can lead to confirmation bias, only seeing data that supports your idea, or just general overconfidence. These biases make objective analysis really difficult.
And I bet just the fear of failure is huge. Science involves failed experiments, but in a startup, failure can feel existential.
Absolutely monumental. When your company's survival is on the line, the idea of running an experiment that might fail is terrifying. But the key is reframing failure. It's not an endpoint. It's data. It's learning.
The fail fast, learn fast mantra?
Exactly. Studies show entrepreneurs who embrace failure as learning are actually more likely to succeed later. Each failure provides crucial information for the next attempt.
Okay, so the challenges are real. Resources, time, expertise, bias, fear. How can businesses, especially smaller ones, overcome these and actually build scientific thinking into their culture?
There are practical strategies. First, start small. You don't need a huge budget. Run small, low-cost tests. A simple survey, an A/B test on an email subject line, a small pilot program. Learn from those, then scale up what works.
Baby steps. Makes sense.
Second, really work to cultivate a data-driven culture. This has to come from the top. Encourage questioning, asking what's the evidence for that? Oh, making data part of every conversation. High-performing companies are way more likely to use data and AI in their processes.
Get everyone thinking with data. What about the skills gap?
Invest in training. Basic training in stats, experimental design, data visualization, not making everyone a data scientist, but giving them the literacy to engage with evidence.
Empowering people.
Yes. And fourth, actively embrace failure as learning. Talk about experiments that didn't work, what was learned, how it helps moving forward. Make it safe to try things and be wrong. Finally, use technology. There are so many tools now, even for small businesses, to help collect and analyze data, run tests, use AI for insights, leverage those tools.
So looking ahead, what's the ultimate vision here if businesses really embrace this scientific thinking? What does that future look like?
It's about more than just making slightly better decisions. It's about fundamentally reimagining possibilities. It means turning your entire operation into a kind of living laboratory. Everything, strategy, products, processes, is constantly being tested, learned from, evolved based on evidence.
Wow, a living lab.
Yeah. The companies that will thrive aren't just using data, they're driven by inquiry and evidence. They are the scientific thinkers, the data-driven dreamers. They're constantly asking, what if, and letting the evidence guide them to the next breakthrough. That's the future.
That's a really compelling vision. And this idea of rigorous evidence-based thinking isn't just for business. It's absolutely critical in fields like public health, where the stakes are incredibly high, community well-being, even life and death.
Absolutely. In public health, evidence-informed decision-making, or EIDM, is paramount. It's defined as integrating the best available evidence into all decisions.
So not just some decisions, but all of them.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
And it's a whole process. Finding the evidence, synthesizing it, implementing changes based on it, and then evaluating those changes. But crucially, EIDM isn't just about academic research findings.
What else does it include?
It also explicitly incorporates the local context, what's unique about this community. Available resources, what can we realistically do? The experience and expertise of public health professionals on the ground. And very importantly, input from the community itself.
So it's research evidence plus practical realities and local knowledge, a much broader view of evidence.
Exactly. It's holistic and pragmatic. And the reasons it's so vital in public health are clear. First, efficient use of scarce resources. Public health budgets are often tight. EIDM helps ensure money and effort go where they'll have the most impact.
Get the most bang for your buck.
Right. Second, it leads to more effective programs because involving stakeholders makes solutions more relevant and tailored. Third, it improves transparency and accountability. Decisions based on clear evidence are easier to justify and explain.
Builds public trust.
Definitely. And most importantly, it leads to better health outcomes and reduces harm. It helps ensure we're doing things that actually work to improve health.
With all those benefits, it seems like EIDM should be everywhere. Why isn't it always the standard? What are the roadblocks?
Well, implementing EIDM is basically organizational change, and that's always hard and needs multifaceted approaches. But a really common and persistent barrier is often insufficient knowledge and skills among staff.
People don't know how to do it.
Often, yes. Many public health workers believe in EIDM, they think it's important, but they may lack the specific skills needed to find, appraise, synthesize, and apply evidence effectively in their busy day-to-day work. That capability gap is a major hurdle.
Okay, so if skills are a gap and change is hard, what strategies actually work to get EIDM implemented across a public health organization?
Research points to three main strategies that seem effective. First is establishing knowledge broker type roles.
Knowledge brokers, what do?
These are people, maybe new hires, maybe existing staff given dedicated time, maybe external consultants whose job it is to bridge the gap between research and practice. They help find evidence, synthesize it, tailor it for local use, support implementation. They act as facilitators and champions for EIDM.
Okay, having dedicated people helps. What's the second strategy?
Directly building staff capacity for EIDM. This usually involves training workshops, but crucially, with ongoing follow-up support, coaching, or mentoring. It's not just a one-off training day. It targets staff at all levels, frontline, managers, leaders, giving them the practical skills and confidence they need.
Continuous learning and support. And the third?
Forming research or academic partnerships. Collaborating with universities or research groups that have expertise in evidence synthesis and implementation science. This brings in external knowledge and resources and can create a nice feedback loop where practice informs research and vice versa.
So knowledge brokers, capacity building, and partnerships. Those are the strategies. Now, let's get into the weeds. What actually helps these strategies succeed or causes them to fail? Can we use a model like COB to understand this?
Yes, the CMB model is perfect for this. It looks at behavior change in this case, adopting EIDM practices through three lenses: capability, opportunity, and motivation.
Okay, let's break it down. What facilitates capability? Making sure staff can do EIDM.
Key facilitators for capability include good staff knowledge and skill development through training. Having those dedicated knowledge broker roles provides expertise and support. And fostering knowledge sharing across the organization is vital. Common platforms, resource libraries, maybe communities of practice where people share learnings, making sure the how-to knowledge is there and accessible.
Got it. Now, what about opportunity? Ensuring people have the chance to actually use those skills in their work environment.
For opportunity, things that help include developing processes and systems that support EIDM, like changing planning templates to require evidence or putting EIDM on meeting agendas routinely, creating forums for learning and skill practice like journal clubs, and absolutely critical, protected time. Staff need dedicated time to actually do EIDM work. If they're swamped, it won't happen no matter how capable they are.
Time is always the killer app, isn't it? Okay, finally, motivation. What makes people want to do EIDM?
Motivation is huge. A supportive organizational culture where EIDM is clearly valued and expected makes a big difference. Having clear expectations from leadership that this is how we do things now, providing recognition and positive reinforcement for EIDM efforts. And maybe most important, strong, visible leadership support from senior and middle managers, driving accountability and modeling the behavior.
Leadership buy-in is key. So those are the enablers. What about the barriers that stop EIDM in its tracks? Using COEB again.
The barriers often mirror the facilitators. For capability, staff turnover is a huge problem. You train people, especially knowledge brokers, and then they leave, taking the knowledge with them.
Brain drain.
Exactly. For opportunity, the biggest ones are usually competing priorities and high workloads. EIDM gets seen as one more thing on an already full plate. And linked to that, the lack of protected time. For motivation, barriers include resistance to change, just general negative attitudes, or a lack of understanding or support from management, making staff feel like it's not really important.
That point about middle management feels really crucial. They control so much of the day-to-day reality for staff.
It's incredibly important. Senior leaders might set the vision, but middle managers often determine if staff actually have the opportunity and support to implement it. They can be critical facilitators or major barriers.
So what's the takeaway here? Is there one magic bullet strategy?
Almost certainly not. The evidence suggests that a combination of strategies is usually needed, addressing capability, opportunity, and motivation simultaneously. And you need to tailor the approach based on the specific barriers and facilitators in your organization. Understanding these factors using something like COMB is crucial for designing effective EIDM implementation plans. It's about a systemic approach.
That's a really practical framework for public health. And this core idea, measuring what matters, proving impact beyond just good intentions, it applies so broadly, especially for organizations working on social issues, youth development.
Oh, absolutely. It's becoming a game changer across the nonprofit and social impact sectors.
Right.
In today's world, with tight resources and more scrutiny, simply having a good mission or telling heartwarming stories often isn't enough anymore.
Funders and the public want proof.
They want proof. Organizations, especially those working with young people, increasingly need robust methods to understand, demonstrate, and improve their effectiveness. Impact measurement provides that rigor.
So it's about shifting from just claiming you do good to rigorously showing you do good and learning how to do it better.
Precisely. Impact measurement lets organizations move beyond anecdotes and compelling narratives to quantifiable, verifiable evidence of the positive changes they're making. It's about collecting data that shows, in measurable terms, the actual difference a program makes.
Tangible results. And who needs to see this evidence? Who are the main audiences?
There are 4 key groups. First, the program beneficiaries themselves. Seeing their own progress measured can be empowering. Second, the volunteers and staff. Seeing the results of their hard work fuels motivation. Third, potential new members or participants. Proof of impact attracts people. And fourth, the wider public, which includes crucial partners, donors, funders, and the media. Showing impact builds credibility and support.
Okay, let's dive into some specific reasons why this is so critical. The outline mentioned 10, let's hit some key ones. How does it help beneficiaries directly, beyond just receiving the service?
Well, think about fostering a sense of belonging and purpose, especially for young people. When they can measure and see the direct impact of their own efforts, maybe tracking improvements in community well-being due to a project they ran, it powerfully connects them to something larger. They see their contribution matters. It's not abstract, it's measurable.
So they feel like active agents of change, not just recipients.
Exactly.
Mm.
And that leads directly to the satisfaction of making an impact. Seeing concrete results, literacy rates improving because of their tutoring project, for example, provides immense personal reward and deepens their connection to the work in the community. It reinforces their value.
And what about the volunteers, the people giving their time? How does measurement help keep them engaged?
It's crucial for understanding and motivating volunteers. Seeing measurable outcomes like improved confidence scores in the youth they mentored makes their efforts feel tangible and worthwhile. It boosts enthusiasm, helps retain them, and even attracts new volunteers. It validates their contribution in a concrete way.
Okay, now this next one sounds really powerful and practical. Enhancing the employability of young people. How does measuring impact help someone get a job?
This is a huge benefit. Impact measurement helps young participants identify and, crucially, articulate the specific skills they've gained, backed by evidence.
So it's not just saying, I learned teamwork.
Right. It's saying, I participated in Project X, where we measured participant teamwork skills using Tool Y, and my scores improved by 30% over 6 months. We also achieved Z outcome. It provides concrete evidence for their CV and interviews.
Wow, that turns volunteer experience into demonstrable skills.
Exactly. For employers, it's not just activities listed, it's proven capabilities. It helps young people tell a compelling story of success and growth, backed by data. That's a massive advantage.
Okay, and what about improving the programs themselves? How does measurement turn program design into more of a science?
Through rigorous program review. First, content evaluation. If data shows a particular module isn't leading to desired outcomes, you can adjust it, refine it, or replace it based on evidence, not guesswork. It creates a data-driven feedback loop for continuous improvement.
So you're not wasting time on stuff that doesn't work. What about how the program is delivered?
That's delivery methods evaluation. You could track how different approaches online versus in-person, different teaching styles affect outcomes. It helps optimize the how as well as the what. Overall, consistent tracking allows for continuous improvement, making evaluation an ongoing learning process, not just a final report.
And externally, how does showing measured impact help with growth, like attracting members or getting funding?
For membership growth and enhanced image, highlighting tangible results is a powerful recruitment tool. People want to join organizations that demonstrably make a difference. Transparency about impact also builds reputation and credibility.
Makes sense. And for partnerships and funding, which are lifeline for many organizations.
It's absolutely critical for developing stronger partnerships and fundraising. Documented success makes you a much more attractive partner for other NGOs, government agencies, or corporations. And for funders, a track record of measurable impact provides a compelling case for investment. It shows their money will achieve real results. It also helps attract and retain talented staff as people want to work for effective, purpose-driven organizations.
So we've journeyed through the philosophy of science, management theory, public health, impact measurement. It all comes back to this evidence-based way of thinking. How does this all connect back to us, to the listener, in everyday life? Is philosophy really relevant outside of academia?
That's the million-dollar choming, isn't it? Is philosophy just for the ivory tower? And the answer is a resounding no. Use philosophy all the time, maybe without naming it. Every time you make a decision, weigh choices, make a judgment about right or wrong, or try to understand a complex situation, you're engaging in philosophical thinking. Philosophy gives you the tools, analytical frameworks, precise language, ways of reasoning to navigate life's complexities more effectively. It helps you develop what you might call an abstract attitude.
Abstract attitude.
Yeah, the ability to step back from the immediate situation, rationalize it, see the underlying principles, and find ways to improve things even when things are tough.
That sounds incredibly useful. Can we look at specific philosophical fields and how they offer practical tools for everyday thinking?
Definitely. Let's start with ethical philosophy. This is the branch that studies morality. What's right, what's wrong, how should we behave?
So, thinking about our values.
Exactly. If you've ever wanted to go deeper than just because I was told so or because that's the law, ethics gives you frameworks. Thinkers like Socrates, Aristotle, Kant, Mill, They offer different systems for evaluating your actions and choices, helping you navigate moral dilemmas with more clarity and consistency.
A moral compass built on reason. Okay, what else?
Logic. This is the study of reasoning itself. Valid arguments, relationships between concepts, laws of truth. It's super analytical.
Sounds like math or computer science.
It's foundational to both. But it's incredibly useful in everyday life, too. Logic helps you evaluate arguments you hear in politics, advertising, even casual conversations. Is what someone saying actually logically sound? Does a conclusion follow from the process? It sharpens your critical thinking tremendously.
Spotting flawed arguments, that's a superpower these days.
It really is. Thinkers from Aristotle to Gödel and Russell refine these tools for clear thinking.
Okay, what about the really abstract stuff like epistemology and metaphysics? How do they connect?
They might seem more removed, but they're foundational. Epistemology asks, how do we know what we know? What counts as knowledge? What is truth? Metaphysics explores the fundamental nature of reality, what actually exists.
Big question.
Huge. And while you might not debate metaphysics over coffee every morning, grappling with these questions deepens your critical thinking about any claim to knowledge. It pushes you to question assumptions, to ask, how do they know that? Or what's the evidence about anything you read or hear? It helps you avoid taking things at face value.
So it trains your mind to be more skeptical and demanding of evidence.
Exactly. It underpins the very idea of evidence-based thinking we've been discussing.
So putting it all together, how can someone listening intentionally cultivate this philosophical, evidence-based mindset for a better life?
It starts with conscious engagement. Remember that funny quote from Socrates? By all means, marry. If you get a good wife, you'll become happy. If you get a bad one, you'll become a philosopher.
Huh. Making the best of a bad situation through thought.
Kind of. His point, maybe tongue-in-cheek, is that philosophy helps you cope, analyze, and find ways forward, even when things are difficult. It gives you that abstract attitude to rise above the immediate frustration.
So it's about actively applying these ways of thinking.
Yes, and you're likely already doing it sometimes. When you choose medical treatment based on clinical trial evidence, not just anecdotes, or consult financial data before investing, or check the sources of a news story before believing it, that is evidence-based, positivist thinking in action.
Prioritizing facts over feelings or hearsay.
Exactly. It's about consciously choosing to prioritize verifiable data and proven results.
So what's the path forward for someone who wants to do this more consistently?
It's about making it a habit. Consciously apply critical thinking, logical reasoning, and demand evidence in more areas of your life. Question assumptions, your own and others. Evaluate information sources. Distinguish between correlation and causation. By doing this consistently, you'll navigate the complex modern world more effectively, make more rational choices, and be less susceptible to misinformation. It's about empowering yourself with reason.
Wow, what a journey. We started down at the philosophical roots with positivism and its counterpoint, critical scientific realism, asking how we even know things.
From the observable to the hidden mechanisms.
Then we saw how that scientific mindset played out practically shaping scientific management with Taylor, driving modern business strategy, informing crucial public health decisions through EIDM, and showing the power of impact measurement.
Right, connecting the abstract ideas to real-world consequences.
And we ended by bringing it right back home, showing how these ways of thinking, this philosophical toolkit, are relevant to your everyday decisions and understanding of the world.
Absolutely. The common thread through everything is the incredible power of evidence-based thinking. It's not just a method, it's a mindset.
A mindset that values facts, systematic inquiry, digging for mechanisms, and being willing to learn and adapt based on what the evidence tells you.
Couldn't see it better. It's about moving beyond just belief to demanding justification and proof.
So here's a final thought for everyone listening. As you go about your day, think about this. Every great scientific leap started with someone asking, what if?
Challenging the status quo.
So what if questions will you start asking in your own life? What assumptions will you challenge? What evidence will you demand before accepting something as true? The laboratory is open, and it includes your own mind.
Are you ready to get to work?